Kia ora koutou, Simon Bowden here for the Arts and Events, Aotearoa Arts and Events during the COVID-19 crisis Facebook page. Welcome to the Goss. For this weekly little series where we talk to wonderful people in the arts about the things that are going on during the COVID-19 kind of era that we've got. Now, today we opened with a very special recording from an album called COVID Collab, which is available on Bandcamp. And that particular track was called Precipice, featuring singing of Brooke Singer, and Edgington was also involved, Dean, Craig, Ben, Lemmy, and Grayson Gilmore. Wonderful track, wonderful album, which you can purchase on Bandcamp. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my wonderful team today. I'm missing one person at the moment, but hopefully she may join us during the call. And like I'm saying, this second little exploration of advocacy in the arts. Lots of talk about building back better, about change that could happen post the big COVID pause, how things could be different for the planet, how things could be different for social interactions, and how things could be different in the arts as well. And along with that came the question, the call, if you like, people asking, well, how do we bring about change? Who are the groups and the organisations that can represent us? Who do they talk to, and how do we make it all work? Hence this little deep dive into advocacy, how we organise it in Aotearoa, and what happens around the country. So last week we talked to people from Arts Wellington, sorry, just forgotten the name of Auckland Regional Arts Trust, Te Taumata Toia Iwi, of course. Yeah. And we also had, Vicky, who did I have? I had someone on from Conventions New Zealand. And one other person whose name will come back to me. Lisa, that's right. And also, of course, Deborah from Scape down in Christchurch. That was a great session. And today, I will get you to introduce yourselves. We have Vicky, Jeremy, and Elise, and we have Eve Gordon, who's also from the AACC group.
Kia ora.
Or in support, yeah. So let's start with you, Vicky. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I'm Vicky Cooksley. I'm a contractor in production and stage management nationwide, with the odd international gig thrown in as well. But primarily I'm here because I represent Entertainment Technology New Zealand, who are the association that represents the individuals and businesses working in the technical sector of the entertainment and events industry. So not just theatre, but the wider entertainment and events industry. So
well, Vicky, thanks. Jeremy.
Kia ora koutou, Jeremy Mail, and I am here representing Creative Waikato, the arts development agency for the Waikato region.
Kia ora. Elise.
Kia ora koutou, ko Elise Sturbeck tōku ingoa. I'm the executive director of the Basement Theatre, been there for about 7 years now. And I also have a history working in arts advocacy back when Creative Coalition was started around the Super City times for Auckland. And I'm currently a trustee on Te Taumata Toia Iwi as well.
Kia ora, Elise. Okay, great. So we have an industry body. We have a person representing a group that advocates for a region, and Elise working for the Basement Theatre, but also involved in all kinds of advocacy on the behalf of Auckland-based things, but also with a national reach. So three nicely diverse groups. Might start with you, Jeremy, actually, because you have quite a defined role, don't you? And a defined kind of a process and relationship with within a region. So maybe you could take us through who you represent and who you advocate to and the general things you're advocating for.
Yeah, so at Creative Waikato, we are independent, funded primarily through the support of Trust Waikato, but also with some of the other councils in the region. And we work as a capability development organisation for artists and arts organisations in the Waikato region, and that being, there's a range of different definitions of that region. And so for us, we follow Trust Waikato's kind of distinction, and so that takes us down as far south as Taumaranui, up to Port Waikato, from Raglan across to Thames Coromandel, and kind of everywhere in that kind of area. So it's quite a big area so we're working with 10 different councils, different iwi groups, different arts organizations, and so we're advocating or working with artists to help them understand where their what their value is and how to articulate that to their funders, to their local councils, but also working with those councils and funders to think a little bit more strategically around how they invest in arts, how they enable arts-based kind of methodologies and ways of thinking beyond just how that involves the art sector, but how that can be utilized in the kind of broader understanding of a community, of a society, about how we can use creative thinking and arts-based thinking to supplement what that does in education and health and well-being and a sense of identity for a community, and what that does for our kind of multicultural and diverse communities. And so working around arts policy, but also just advocating on behalf of organizations who are looking for funding support and trying to present a clear picture of the broader ecosystem of the arts, which can be kind of amorphous and ever changing and hard to define, particularly in the regions, as opposed to kind of what's happening in Auckland and Wellington, where the distance between grassroots community participatory art making and professional art making may not be may be done by the same people with different hats on, and that's not saying that the quality of work is any less than anything that's happening anywhere else. There's the phenomenal work that's happening here, but the infrastructure and the organizations that are serving the community are often serving a really broad range of what's going on. And so the understanding of where that sits and who is responsible for what and how we can get councils to think about that and how we can encourage them to advocate nationally as well as what we're doing nationally around where that sits, and also how arts funding, particularly from a regional perspective, primarily goes to Auckland and Wellington, and what we can do from a regional perspective on a national scale to kind of shift that, particularly as there's so much emphasis on well-being and achieving well-being and why that's important, and why we kind of need to invest in people, why investing in the arts is ultimately investing in people, because it's about the outcomes that arts activity creates and enables rather than just the output of making the artwork.
Fantastic. It's that's such a huge body of thought leadership, and I can see how you would need to be in dedicated relationships with people whose ears were open,
Yep.
to be able to hear all of those things and also to be able to experience them, be connected with them. I imagine directly by being connected with work, meeting people throughout the sector, as you say, from professional through to, and so is it working? Are the people in the decision-making positions, the ones that you need to be on board, are their hearts and minds and their ears open to you in the Waikato?
Yes and no, depending on who you're talking to. In terms of my involvement in this role, I've been CEO at Creative Waikato since February. So it's a relatively short time to be embedded in those kind of conversations, but so far it's been a really robust engagement, particularly through lockdown, with the Waikato Community Funders Group, which brought all of the different philanthropic funders together and how they responded. They were looking to us for advice around how to understand arts and where that sits, and we were able to work with them on developing a couple of initiatives around that, which we can talk to later if you want. And then we're still strengthening my own personal relationship and engagement with the council. So the team have some of those relationships, and as part of that, we've been working on a project called the Waikato Arts Navigator, which is essentially a regional arts strategy that aims to kind of look at long-term plans for different councils and helps them to understand how arts outcomes can be applied to the things that they're already doing, but also encouraging them to think more deeply around what role the arts plays in their community, but also particularly now in a period of recovery, and how we collectively use art as a coping mechanism. I think that's a kind of natural thing for humanity, and we've seen it throughout the lockdown period, and we still see it as a way of kind of understanding who we are and our identity and our connection to one another and our sense of community. And so there is a receptive group of people around that. But there's always kind of battles, because the funding pools and the ability to do things is always limited, particularly when you're looking at councils. They've got a number of different things that they're having to sort of make decisions around, and there is a tendency sometimes to put arts as a nice to have, a thing that's an extra. And so one of our key kind of messages is that it's not a nice to have. It's not the icing on the cake. It's an essential kind of part of a society that thrives, and the investment in that has outcomes beyond just the making of a pretty painting on a wall, or a piece of theatre or something like that.
Right. I've actually seen that strategy, and I think if Arts Waikato was up for sharing, I think a lot of people would really like it, because it provides a practical blueprint for civic leaders to engage in the arts. So I can see the strength of relationships being a critical piece of the ongoing work that you do. And that's quite similar to what Arts Wellington has done as well. Meg Williams talked last week about she's basically in there with the thought leaders in relationship, delivering ideas, being called up for advice. How do we keep our sector strong?
Yeah.
And Vicky, you have developed quite strong relationships with government, haven't you, recently through forming a coalition with other advocacy groups? Do you want to tell us about that?
That's right. I think Lisa spoke a bit about this last week. I didn't see it, but I've heard that she did. ETNZ have been working really closely with New Zealand Events Association, Entertainment Venues Association, Conference Innovations New Zealand, and Promoters Association, and Music Helps. So we all teamed up quite early on and started lobbying MB, which got us meetings in front of Minister Twyford. So we've been working in that sector with the major events team. I have to say I haven't had much luck in the other direction yet, in the MCH direction, but we've definitely got the ear of Minister Twyford, and he's actually tasked us all to stay together as a recovery working group for the time being, probably until we hit level 0. So we'll be meeting monthly is the hope, to keep a tab on what's happening across the whole sector as much as we can, and advocate for whatever we feel like we need through this period of recovery.
You had a direct role in the $10 million major event fund establishment, is that right?
Yeah, that was one of the things we asked for money early on. We all put together individual discussion documents, and then came to an agreement around an overall roadmap for recovery. And that was one of the things we asked for. Some of the other things have been delivered through other initiatives that government have announced over time without us having to lobby further. And then there's a few things that still haven't been touched on, but we'll see what happens going forward. So
Right.
That 10 million was part of some of the money that we did ask for around recovery in the domestic market.
I'm interested in the nature of the relationship between the organisations and government. The relationship, it's interesting you say MCH hasn't responded yet. Now, we all know that MCH has received a huge amount of money and is building a team at the moment to be able to distribute that money, probably through a contestable funding process, which is unusual for the arts, because usually the contestable money is delivered through Creative New Zealand. So this is going to be actually a whole new government agency with the ability to distribute contestable funding, which is going to mean change at the very least. So it may be that you're not getting a response because they haven't quite got the team together yet, and they're wanting to do that. But I'm just interested in the nature of the relationship with Minister Twyford. Was that really about there's a section of our economy that's in trouble and we're going to come in and through your teams, we're going to fix that problem? And did that make an easier conversation than, say, the ministry, which has got much more complex kind of arts-based and heritage things to deal with?
Quite possibly. It was kind of recognised that we think of CNZ a kind of content, so that what's inside, and we kind of all thought of ourselves as we're kind of the shell that holds everything. So the venues, the suppliers, the production chain. So I think that's where we sit more closely in there, and it is a big impact on the economy if all our businesses start going out of business and we can't deliver events. And I'm just not seeing any trickle to that supply chain in the other direction. But Twyford very early on offered to represent the event sector because it was recognised that actually they don't fall in the other area. It's the biggest problem we've found through this whole process is we actually fall under more than one ministry. So for a while they kept batting us backwards and forwards, ETNZ anyway, not the other, I don't know where the others fell in that, but we actually got a lot of batting backwards and forwards. MB would say, you fall under CNZ and MCH, and they would say, you don't fall under us. So it's a bit of a grey area going on as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, talking of complexity, Elise, you've dealt with quite deep complexity in terms of digging deep into why and the impact of the arts and the role of it in society. And you've written beautifully. I've read some of your documents about that. Also worked really strategically. I remember with numerous different people in Auckland Council who tended to come and listen and then change. So tell us about some of that work and where you think it might have made an impact, and perhaps where it's been hard to get progress and understanding and sort of a deeper commitment to the arts, especially in the Auckland region.
Yeah, I think the learnings for me over 10 years of experimenting with different advocacy approaches have been, I think it really comes back to the capability of our sector to advocate and have, because I come from a political studies background and really interested in policy and how we influence policy agendas. And I took on a role at an arts organisation like Basement to really learn what that experience is of being in the trenches and just trying to keep an organisation alive. And that's taught me that there's just so little capability and capacity in our sector to engage in an advocacy conversation. And that's where I think we've really struggled over the years to have the impact that we've wanted to have. But I think that's really shifting in this year following all of this COVID disruption. And our sector has had moments where when crisis happens, we come together and we take strategic action. I think where we struggle is the more ongoing advocacy work, which is the critical work in my view, is to be able to keep up constant monitoring and pressure and maintain those relationships with people in positions of power in order to be considered a kind of credible threat or voice or, to go to in times of budget setting or in times where the government is trying to achieve innovative or aspirational projects and sees a role for our sector to play in that. So our sector needs a lot of capacity in order to be able to step in and play the role that I think we have a huge potential to play in our society. So I think the reason I've approached it in that way or landed on that style of thinking is that it gives us more power to think, actually, what can we control? And rather than feeling, I think there's a lot of inherited sort of insecurities, I guess, in our sector where we feel we're at the bottom of the ladder, maybe when we think of other sectors in society who really deserve support, we often don't value ourselves enough alongside that. So I think it's about building up our own sense of value, a collective voice, and the structures that support us to have ongoing relationships and provide ongoing criticism and comment on things as they unfold in that political space. Yeah.
So how would you see for Auckland that being organised? Because I know that there's been coalitions formed, there's been a number of sort of independent groups formed, papers written, voices, certain waves of city council officials that have listened, wonderful strategies. I've seen some brilliant strategies in Auckland, but unfortunately they were never funded or delivered, So how can you organise that, and also how can you organise it in a way so, as Jeremy was saying, people out in the sector, through their own development of their own practice and through the way they talk through funding applications or out and about, can become advocates as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really wonderful to join the board of Te Taumata, and I joined in late 2018, and since then we've been having very deep strategic discussions about our role and placing advocacy as one of our kind of top 4 areas of focus, really. And since then we've been able to develop a kind of strategy around advocacy. And although, previously we were maybe thought of as somewhat of a contestable funding body, but we really don't have that much resource to spread around our sector, which is very in need of resource. So we felt it was more effective to place that resource in strategic activities like advocacy. And I think we're really starting to see the fruits of that now, in that we're able to resource staffing. It was a big thing around being effective, is to just pay people to do the work, because within our arts organisations, we don't have that staff capacity to really undertake advocacy work. So I think, we're seeing our role for ourselves as a facilitator of collective conversations around advocacy, much like you're doing with this platform. But I'm starting to see more dots joining up, which I think is going to be really effective. But I think what I'm seeing too is it's great to have a peak body like Te Taumata can play that role of in Auckland, to help connect into and coordinate a whole lot of different players. But that's when I think you start to see gaps in the kind of subsectors of the art sector, and particularly for me in theatre, I think there's a lack of a kind of collective voice, particularly in Auckland and for the professional sector. So I'm really interested in what are those gaps in the kind of ecosystem of our sector that we can bring some more attention to, so that they can coordinate their activity and send a representative up to the peak level, who then Te Taumata can send their representative up to the national conversation and so on. So I think that's really important. But I will say that for me, when we've been most successful, I mean, I once led just an email chain of encouraging people to make submissions to the last council budget a couple back, and just making people aware of what's at risk and providing the means to make a comment on that. We were able to get 1,000 submissions, and it's so heartening to see that that can really change something, but it is a bit of a numbers game. And I think that's why I see that sector organisation so important, because that's when we can mobilise really easily if we already have that phone call tree or that, in place. And then we get known for being able to activate that quickly, and that's what creates the kind of fear or, at least the willingness to listen from those decision makers. Yeah.
Thanks, Elise. That sounds great. I could see that vision and that ability to bring people together quickly around, especially around issues like emergency budgets and scary things like that, but also that deeper thinking, and the appointment of people and how important they are in decision making. I was also interested in what you said about, sometimes we feel like we're a sector that's not as valued as other sectors as well. And Jeremy, I'm thinking of your predecessor at Arts Waikato now. And she was developing that strategy we talked about a while ago, at a time where people were going to conferences and being videoed, and they were kind of pleading to the nation, please like the arts, value us too. And a lot of us got concerned that was a really, a deficit position, and it was actually going to be very detrimental. And I just can't remember your predecessor's name. I think she went to
Sarah.
Sarah, yeah.
Yes.
And Sarah kind of cut across that, didn't she? She didn't go to the regional councils and say, plead with them to like the arts. She came and said, it's important. Here's a framework for how to deliver.
And that's a big part of the way that we operate, in the way that my own beliefs in my previous role as an academic and researcher is around coming at these things from a strengths-based perspective. And it's understanding that the arts and the role that artists and arts organizations play are an essential service. It's differently essential to health and to transport and to all these other things, but it is essential and it is valid, and it's not about wondering whether it is or isn't valued, because it is. It's about emphasizing what that value is and how we articulate that, and encouraging other artists and arts organizations to also come from that same place, because it can often come from this kind of woe is me place. And yes, like, the arts should be more funded, and yes, all of these issues are true, but they're not compelling, and they don't encourage engagement, and they don't encourage investment. Actually saying, we're really strong, these are the awesome things that we do, these are the reasons why you want to be a part of this, because these are the benefits that it's going to have for your community or for your people, and these are the reasons why, like, this is why it's awesome, and this is what is happening here. And imagine if it was funded twice as much, how much more awesome it could be. And so it's not about saying we can't do anything because we're not funded. It's like, artists always do stuff when they're not funded. It's an amazingly passionate group of people who enable stuff to happen, and artists are often first responders in a time of crisis, in a time of trauma. And we've already seen that in this. We've seen that in Christchurch. We've seen that with the Australian bushfires. Like, we see it all the time where artists are like, there's an issue, there's a thing that's going down, what can I do to make this better for my fellow people around me? And that is so incredibly valuable. And so then in this situation, we've got a sector that was immediately decimated and is going to take so much longer to come back because of the nature of what that means for the impact on funding. Like, for those who are doing bigger productions, you can't just like, oh, lockdown is tomorrow, right, let me stage it the next day. That's not how it works. It takes 2, 3, 6 months, 10 months to put together the show, to rehearse the show, to develop the thing, to create the thing. That it's going to take that long again from now to get those things happening again. So we need to understand the value of that and invest in that and make it sustainable. And when it comes to what was said earlier around those the venue things and the suppliers who don't kind of fall into that funding pool, that same thing exists for the like community arts organizations, where like some of them are venues, some of them are creative spaces, some of them are different kind of places that people can get together and be creative, or they can learn, or they can develop, or they can present work. But often they don't fall under Creative New Zealand funding because they're funding projects, and some of them will apply for projects, but that doesn't enable operational kind of funds, and that doesn't come from Creative Community Scheme, and that doesn't often come from council, or if it does, it's a little bit and not enough for it to be sustainable. And then it comes from philanthropics, and then those organizations spend half of their time filling in funding applications every year to try and make enough to just survive. Well, that's not embracing the value. And they'll all talk about, oh, it's so great what's happening, and I took my family out to see this show and it was amazing. But it's like, what? I can't understand how we have to have this kind of conversation where it's like, the value is there. You've been to it, you understand it. So let's embrace that, and let's make it properly sustainable, and sustainable in a way that you see that being an investment in people more broadly, which makes access to the arts more affordable. If the venue, if the infrastructure is funded to be able to provide that, that becomes a subsidy for the presentation of work, which means the ticket prices can be less, which means that more people can attend, so you're achieving bigger benefits in your community because more people can access the work. I mean, you can look at the price of going to the theatre and look at the Meteor Theatre here. The ticket to see a show there in the 90s was $10. The ticket to see a show there now is $10, or it's $15. Inflation has been massive, but it hasn't impacted what artists are trying to do to make their work accessible to their communities. And that's where that value and that strength-based position enables us to say, this is the awesome work that's happening, and this is why you want to be a part of it.
So those are national issues, aren't they? They're not just issues in the Waikato.
No.
Right throughout the whole country. So I'm interested in who might take up, the cry nationally. Who can we advocate to? And Vicky, you've managed to get some headway with central government on a national issue. How can we get issues like venues? Venues are in your advocacy world, aren't they? So what is the government saying when you talk about the state of venues?
I can't answer on Evans's behalf. It's a shame Sally Ann didn't opt to come on today.
Yeah.
They're seen, a lot of venues are seen as funded by councils. We all know that that's actually not the case, which is some education we need to get out there. They're not all funded or owned by councils. So it's all the other ones that are struggling right now. So they're the ones that we do need to advocate for. I don't know where we start there, probably in the same realms. As I say, Evans are on the same group that we are on. So they are speaking for the little venues and trying to get them help as well. It's it's a wide problem. It's getting that money through that supply chain, and not just to the content going into venues or the content going to the suppliers and the technicians. It's it's supporting all those others. And you're right, Jeremy, stuff doesn't start up straight away. Talking to our members, they think it's upwards of 10 months before we're back up and at anything near to full pace, and that's with borders still closed, which is going to impact a number of the slightly bigger suppliers as well. So we're in it for the long haul now.
Yeah.
But the positive is we are not in the same position as the rest of the world. So we can thank our lucky stars that we're where we're at, and we can actually move forward. I've sat in on a lot of international seminars and webinars now, and we're just steps ahead. So yeah.
Thank goodness for that. But yeah, we're feeling it for our technical friends and our venues that need to wait for the funding to come through, for the shows to be built. It's a long road. Yeah. Eve, did you have your hand up?
Me, no. I was just kind of like you hear tautoko kind of styles.
Cool.
It's tricky times.
Yeah. Elise, I'm interested in some of the big themes that you've discussed, and I know you've been. I'm not sure, but I'm sort of assuming that you've been in discussion with someone, for example, like Peter O'Connor, who's tried to have art and art practice and solutions considered, say, for example, in the health sector, and found it incredibly frustrating. And when we were sitting waiting for the government to announce how it was going to make good on its promise that the arts would be part of the recovery in Aotearoa, we heard there was going to be 25 million more for CNZ over 2 years, and we went, oh, that doesn't sound like much. And then this huge amount of money dropped on MCH. A little bit around capability building, which interestingly, they are taking 12 million of that to distribute themselves, and then CNZ and Film Commission do a small amount of that. And then this 170 million, 160 million, one's on basically creating more work to get people together. And then the other one's around innovation. And what interests me is I don't recall the innovation piece being ever advocated to a greater extent as something that we think, the sector was kind of saying was most important. I think the sector was saying sustainability for art practice, networks, national networks, venues, and how can we integrate the arts more so that its benefits, benefit health through engaging practitioners that want to be involved in those kinds of things. Did it surprise you that after all of those years of advocating for certain things, the government just kind of seemed to come up with their own ideas?
I mean, I think there has been a bit of a lack of vision of our sector exactly in what we want. I think we've struggled to really pin it down to go, this is what we feel will make the biggest difference to our sustainability. I mean, I think different parts of our sector have different ideas, and so there's been a lack of clarity maybe in that voice. And yet Peter O'Connor and I have had many sessions where we've tried to pull these things together and come up with a kind of cohesive common ground. I guess for me, the innovation is in that embeddedness of our sector across other parts, across other government departments and other parts of our society. I'm not sure exactly how they've described what that innovation is meant to look like. Have they given any other?
No, not very much detail, but they say
Yeah.
a big emphasis on digital, an emphasis on
Right.
international markets, and an emphasis on Māori content internationally, which I assume obviously without appropriation, which brings its own challenges.
Yeah, so I think that does make me wonder, who has been successful in their advocacy and getting to the ear of those people in order for that to become a priority, because I think that's where those ideas come from. It's so yeah, I think that is the challenge for us, to continue to articulate that shared vision in order for us to arrive at something that's going to have more widespread impact on our sector, because you tend to get this kind of picking the winning ideas, or the cherry picking of ideas that government does, and it's just whatever someone serves them up at the right time and gets the right ear and has thought it out in enough detail. I mean, I think that's the challenge for our sector, is not only how do we come up with the idea, but how do we almost make it ready to action so that government can cherry pick it like that for us. Yeah.
Because Jeremy and Waikato and Megan Wellington have got direct relationships and direct lines to people that are decision makers in those kinds of regions. And I know Te Taumata Toa Iwi, in its advice pre-COVID to government, suggested there should be a panel, an advisory panel to the Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage, well, in this case, to the Prime Minister. Some people have been calling for the establishment of an arts advisor, like there is a science advisor. The interesting thing about the science advisor is they have in many ministries, they have counterparts, so they can coordinate activity between ministries. I had a talk to someone, I probably shouldn't say who it was, but this knowledgeable person somewhere in the government world said, people write for the Prime Minister, and somebody else probably answers those letters. 90% of them are not very well informed. I'm talking specifically about arts advocacy now. The Prime Minister has gone across to the Minister of Health and said, hey, why don't you look at, but of course the Minister of Health, especially now, is dealing with a major pandemic. And even though Peter O'Connor says there's 7,000 papers, 5,000 papers, more examples of where the arts is cost less and has better outcomes with no side effects in the health, but just getting it through. And also there doesn't seem to be the existence of anyone that can own a long-term strategy in government. I was told really ministries can only really sort of think in 3-year blocks, and they're dealing with ministers' objectives. They're quite attached to their ministers. Although the job descriptions for people applying for jobs at the ministry at the moment quite clearly say you must have a long-term kind of, so there's a bit of a oxymoron going on there. But so can you see how we could nationally organise ourselves so we had a much better relationship with government? Any
Yeah,
idea?
I mean, I do think it lies in that territory of an advisor role, or we've talked about a kind of creative commission as well, where it's sort of like an independent commission that can hear from all sorts of great spokespeople from our sector who can tell the stories. They did something like that in the UK that was quite effective. So we've looked at things like that. I mean, I think in the Prime Minister, we do have a really competent ally in that she has such a long history of engagement with our sector, really meaningful engagement, and she does understand the challenges of the sector, but unfortunately she's got a lot of other things on her plate. So I think there is an opportunity, and if she's gets another term, that I think as a sector, we really need to be ready to push what the opportunities of that next term look like, because I think we sort of missed the boat on this term in a lot of ways. We just didn't get ourselves organised in time, and I think she has been receptive, but they're waiting for the answer to come from our sector. So somehow we have to find the capacity within our sector to really clearly articulate the initiative, So for me, that looks like something like a commission that can start bringing that picture together. Yeah.
And should that voice be a strong voice with our own language? I'm wondering, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance set out a wellbeing budget and said to the nation, we're now going to measure things in terms of wellbeing as well as economic impact. And that resulted in a flood of arts spokespeople saying, well, hey, we're wellbeing too. But that in itself may have disempowered a good, strong voice, because if you're always reactionary and trying to jump on a bandwagon, you can't hold a long-term position for yourself. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you think there's something in that?
I'm not sure I quite understand what you mean, but it just makes me think of the living standards framework that this government has introduced, and the art sector has been left out of that in a big way. There's a really great paper that's been written for the Treasury on the cultural wellbeing as a potential fifth paradigm there, and I think that it should be a real area of advocacy focus for our sector, because it just elevates our role and importance in this kind of cross-cutting way that we want to, this cross-cutting impact that we want to have. So I think it's really important that we keep pushing that agenda. But yeah, I just sorry, I've forgotten where I was going with it.
Yeah. It's really great to bring up that framework, because so you had the notion of wellbeing, but then you had the framework that laid out actually how it's a bit like what you've done in Waikato, Jeremy, with a framework for implementation. And in this case, the arts was missed out. And so there's an important piece of advocacy work to do there. And I think I remember, I'm sorry anyone that's listening from the ministry, I don't mean to bag you, and I know things have changed quite radically and they've got a huge amount more resource now, but at the time the rumour was the Ministry of Arts, Culture and Heritage wasn't really equipped with the resource or the research capability to actually make that argument properly to Treasury. I mean, to be honest, might be changing.
The ministry's been pretty disengaged from the art sector for over a decade. Their focus has not been at all on arts. It's been heritage and culture, and arts has been a very minor part of that, I would say. But I mean, just to your point before about well-being, I think we get a little bit hung up on this term sometimes, and it can have a very narrow application in that you're looking at purely well-being things, related to mental health and so on. But the way that the government is using it through that living standards framework is very broad. So I think we just need to recognise that that's the language of our time, and we need to place ourselves within that as having a really key role. So that's where bringing in that cultural wellbeing, cultural capital aspect is really critical, because this is it's replaced the economic paradigm, I guess, in terms of policy. So I think we just need to adopt it, roll with it, show how all the different ways, there's so many different types of well-being, economic, natural, environment, all of that. So how do we sit across all of that? Yeah.
But if the national government came back in and did away with the well-being thinking and the framework and returned more to an economic value base, which is the environment that we create was created in, which is an organisation that sought to seek agency for creative practitioners and design and everything within an economic kind of context. Would you advocate shifting the arts is now talking about its economic value?
I think you've got to be nimble, don't you? That's the game of advocacy. So at the moment, we've been discussing an economic impact study for the Aotea Performing Arts Precinct, just as a way to really speak into that local government space at the moment, because it's all about the bottom dollar line for them right now. And so even though for a lot of us, economic impact studies are seen as pretty passé, actually they can be a really effective tool to just say we deserve to maintain access to the funding that you have given us, and in fact increase that. So I think we have to draw on any and everything within our grasp and adapt to the policy agenda of the time. That's on us to be that nimble and and always anticipating the next direction, I guess. Yeah.
Do you agree with that, Jeremy? And how do you respond to the kind of what do you call it, the not the paradigm, the ideology of the time, whilst holding on to your values and also trying to have a long-term vision for what the Waikato could be like with integrated and developed and supported arts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, like you said, the ability to be nimble is important, but it's also ultimately they're just different ways of measuring and analyzing a thing that is never ever going to convey the whole picture. The whole picture is the artwork. It is the arts experience, and all we're doing is articulating it and measuring it in a way that becomes easy for people who weren't there or don't understand how it works. And if for now it's well-being, and yesterday it was economic value, and tomorrow it's bums on seats, or however you want to measure that, the measurement is not, it doesn't predicate whether a thing does or doesn't do something. It just articulates what is happening using a framework that other things are being assessed on. And so it's a game that we play, and the better we play that game with evidence and support and understanding, the more chance we have of having the pendulum swing in our direction. And so well-being as a kind of concept is a useful one. It's a term that's kind of thrown around a lot, and I know that in the last 3 months I've said it more times than I care to count, but it is what we're looking at. And I think that while it can be kind of tempting to break it down into cultural well-being and social well-being and economic well-being and environmental well-being, and those distinctions are useful to some extent, but actually most things tick multiple boxes depending on how you choose to analyze them. And cultural well-being can also have a social well-being impact and an economic well-being impact, and can be measured in an accounting format, and can be measured in all these different things. But it's about having an understanding of the language that's being used and enabling more people to use it in the same way, so that when we are advocating to councils or to government or to ministry, we're singing from the same songbook, and we're saying that this is a thing that we know that we're doing, and these are the ways that we're measuring it. And when it comes to cultural and creative well-being, those things are ultimately ephemeral and hard to measure in a way that will fill in a box on a spreadsheet, but if we can come up with a methodology to do that, and that's some of the work that we're currently doing is around kind of research of developing a toolkit that means that you can answer, like apply these few questions to the work that you're doing and say, this is the well-being impact that we're having, and this is the way that aligns with economic impact or whatever measure that you choose to do. And so it becomes a way of understanding the work that you do and articulating that, but then you can place kind of whatever lens you need to place on that depending on who you're talking to, because there's a mandate for councils to address wellbeing now. There might not be tomorrow, or you might be talking to another funder who is only focused on impact investment and what are they investing in, what is the impact that they're looking for. Can you articulate the thing that you're doing? Does it fit in that? Well, if you can, great, you can have access to that funding. So if we can think about, it doesn't change the value of what we do. It's just a tool and a collection of language that enables us to speak to what's being measured at that time.
Fascinating, because not only do you have to be an advocate for the arts within the sector and a supporter of individual practitioners and helping them with pathways and the ecology, but we also have to be experts on the way that other people think. We have to know how politicians think. We have to know what ideologies mean. We need to know and we need to know about how bureaucracies think within a policy paradigm. So we're putting quite a lot on ourselves. Did you find that, Vicky, when you took on these challenges, did you have to think quite hard, who's my audience here and how do I communicate with these people?
Yeah, definitely. And we found we had to become statisticians as well. It's like, it's all this information you need to collect it's not what we do. We all do our jobs. So yeah, definitely a lot of what do we need to present, and how do we even collect that information? Where do we get it from? Something we can actually all learn from this is encouraging people we know to use similar job descriptions on the census so we can actually get some really good measures of who is even in this industry. There's a whole lot of things we can do going forward to help us in this area and with our advocacy and collect the information and to feed into what these people think we need to think or what they think. Yeah. That's really interesting, because that whole area of actually starting to measure it, simple things like how many people actually work in the industry. I remember Linda Clark presented to a function in Wellington. She'd done the work on the value of the arts community in Wellington, including film, etc. And she said it was as big as the biggest, well, not as big as the biggest industries, but big enough to have a direct line to the Prime Minister. It was organised into one group. So, Elise, lots of individual groups right around the nation saying similar things. Can you see a way to connect them all up? Should there be a Bandcamp? Not a Bandcamp. What's one of the platforms? A Slack page. How could we get the beginning of these independent advocacy organisations sharing, depositing information and sharing?
I have thought about that often in the past and tried various means. And to be honest, I really don't value the digital space. Maybe that's because of where I work in the live space, but I find that the digital space only works if the relationships are pre-existing and are strong in themselves. So I think that's where the work has to be done for our sector. And the way we can do that is by having a really good summit or conference. I don't think that exists for our sector at a national level yet. There's the Nui Te Korero held by CNZ, but that's very much targeted at CNZ clients, and I think excludes a lot of people that need to be part of a broader advocacy and sector conversation. So I think working towards some kind of summit event would be great. The other way that I think we build deep, effective relationships is through co-locating ourselves. So I have a bit of background in the co-working space, and I've seen the power of that, just people working alongside each other, interacting over the water cooler, forming new collaborations, new alliances. It's just, otherwise we don't find the time to have regular meetings. I think we have best intentions around meeting with each other, but often they get put aside for the very pressing needs of work. So if those meetings can just happen almost by accident or bumping into each other, then that's really powerful. I know there was a really great plan for Auckland Live to develop a whole set of studios and offices, and they were looking at being able to provide office and shared space to a lot of performing arts and arts organisations. So it'd be awesome to see projects like that go ahead despite the disruption we've seen this year. So I think that's where we need to focus our efforts in order to grow our influence and our kind of connection with each other. Yeah,
I love it. What a great vision for a kind of the near future. You know, this is a build back better thing, isn't it? If we can start to slowly, you know, or hopefully not that slowly, organise space so that we were co-locating in our different environments, different regions, and then there was connections between those hubs. So, you know, I'm pretty sure that I can go and pull up a chair and now it's Waikato anytime I want and use the free Wi-Fi. And
Yeah, come in.
Come in. We could probably even get a free cup of coffee.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, or I'd turn up with some takeaways for you, as long as they were in sustainable cups. You know, so that's a fabulous, and I, you know, if you add the venues, etc., you know, there is an opportunity. We've all felt a lot closer by getting together around the nation. I sorry to put digital first, at least take your point, but on the other hand, all these Zoom calls and things have brought us together when we couldn't be physically together, and the idea of that could live on being more connected. Love the idea of a biennial, or biennials every 2 years, summit or something like that. There's another thing to push for as well. Maybe we can fit that into the Ministry of Arts, Culture and Heritage funding, you know, as a first try. Hey, it's 5:30 now, so we've done a good hour. Thank you very much. Look, I said this last week and I want to say it again. Some people are full-time advocates, some people fit it in amongst their other jobs, and so there's large components of voluntary time represented by all of you and the people in behind you, and I just want to acknowledge and thank you for that. It's a huge thing that you do for all of us, for the nation, and everybody is very grateful. Aoha nui. Any last comments? We good?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Great session.
Thanks, Dame.
Kia ora koutou. See you soon. Coming to a hub near you. Bye. Ka kite.